Good evening, and welcome to the next installment of Meet the Leaders. I am your host, Jerry McPherson, Director of Economic Empowerment for the Greater Phoenix Urban League. Now, before we get started, we got a little bit of housekeeping items that I need you all to participate in. Please like, comment, and share. Let the world know that you're with us. We want to get as many people to the broadcast as possible. Tonight, we'll be talking about police reform. And in fact, this is actually the 1-year anniversary since we began the Meet the Leaders program, and we'll be revisiting the topic that got it all started, police reform revisited. Now, we'll be taking a slightly different approach than we did in years past, since the last time we had this program, and we'll be speaking with both activists and advocates with boots on the ground and in the trenches, fighting the good fight to bring about police reform in our community. So again, please like, comment, share, let the world know that you're with us. We got an amazing broadcast ahead of us. We have Mark Morial, the president and CEO of the National Urban League, will be participating in tonight's program. We have Jamal Williams, public defender and activist, as well as Warren Stewart Jr., pastor with Proactive Justice. So again, please like, comment, share, let the world know that you're with us. We got an amazing broadcast ahead of us. We want as many people tuned in as possible. And of course, we have prepared questions, but you'll have the opportunity to ask the questions that you have on your mind as well. So at any time, please feel free to drop it in the comments. Any questions that you may have, we will have some time reserved at the end of our broadcast to get those answered. So again, like, comment, share, let the world know that you're with us. For those people that are tuning in, please let us know where you're watching from, city, state, county, region. Let us know where all of our supporters are coming in from. We like to know that we are equally represented throughout the Greater Phoenix area and providing the support to those who need us most. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the president and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Urban League, George Dean. Take it away, George.
Good evening. I'm George Dean, president and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Urban League, and I extend a warm welcome to each of you for our July 2021 Meet the Leaders Forum. It has been about 14 months since George Floyd was brutally murdered in Minneapolis, and since his death, the U.S. Congress has still not passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. As a nation, we're still in need for just and humane policing, police accountability, police transparency, and racial justice. More than 75% of Americans say discrimination is a big problem, and 57% understand that Black and brown people of color are more likely to suffer from police violence than other demographic groups. I have said before, and I say again, America stands at a crossroad. The choice is clear. Do we have the will and the determination to finally rise above 400 years of bigotry and racism? We cannot move fast enough to embrace personal and collective change. As our young emerging leaders remind us, our inaction and intolerance are literally choking the promise of freedom, the essential essence that launched and guided us throughout our history. It does not matter if injustices come packaged as overt acts or implicit assumptions. It makes no difference if a false sense of superiority is fostered by ignorance or fed by hate. As people, we must talk openly about race and racism and its impact on our behavior. Challenge injustices when we see it in the streets or in the boardroom. Vote to put individuals in elected office that reflect our values. Require routine implicit bias training for prosecutors, routine review of data metrics to expose and address racial inequity, and the incorporation of racial impact review and performance reviews for individual prosecutors. Black Lives Matter. In an instance, during confrontation with police, we also lose lives to mass incarceration. Tonight, we are fortunate to have Mark Morial, president and CEO of the National Urban League, who will talk about what the National Urban League is doing about police reform. We also have two young emerging leaders, Warren Stewart Jr., pastor of Proactive Justice, and Jamal Williams, public defender and activist, to share with us their thoughts on police reform and racial justice. Stay tuned, listen closely, and ask questions if you're so inclined. And if you haven't been vaccinated, do so ASAP. Your life could depend on it. Back to you, Jerry.
Thank you, President Dean, for your leadership and having led the Greater Phoenix Urban League for over 29 years, nearly 40 plus years of service to the National Urban League. Thank you for your service as always. So as President Dean mentioned, we got two emerging leaders, and maybe emerging is not the appropriate word because they're already leaders in our community. They have definitely been on the ground, putting in the time, energy, and effort to evoke change and bring about justice in our community. So we thank them and look forward to hearing from them later in the broadcast. But before we do so, we will hear from Mark Morial, President and CEO of the National Urban League.
And CEO of the National Urban League. And I want to thank George Dean, the leader of the Phoenix Urban League, for an outstanding record of leadership, advocacy, and passionate support for civil rights, as well as to Jerry McPherson, who directs the economic empowerment portfolio at the Phoenix Urban League. Both of them and the entire Phoenix Urban League team are our valued colleagues in Phoenix and an important part of what we need to do, not only in Phoenix and in Arizona, but all across the nation. Thank you, gentlemen, for your leadership. Last year has been an incredible year for civil rights. Civil rights, social justice, economic justice, fairness, diversity, equity, inclusion, and action. A year ago, when George Floyd was murdered on the streets of the streets of Minneapolis, the world was shocked and responded with force and activism unseen in modern American history. And rightfully so. That death on those streets at the hands of the police and the subsequent conviction of police officer Chauvin stand out as one example of police accountability, but not justice. Justice is systemic, justice is broader. But in that one instance, so far, Derek Chauvin will be held accountable, will do time in jail for the death of George Floyd. George Floyd's life, George Floyd's impact, George Floyd's legacy is already profound, but will even be more profound. Since the death of George Floyd, I've been part of a coalition, leading, working, endeavoring to pass a policy response to the death of George Floyd, known as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. That bill, introduced over a year ago by Representative Karen Bass of California and Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, establishes a new set of parameters and frameworks around how policing is to be carried out and conducted across the United States. It is an accountability bill, it's a guidance bill, it's a leadership bill. And it does a number of things. It would create a national registry of bad police, police who've been terminated, police against whom serious disciplinary action has been taken, so that you don't have police department hopping where an officer's fired in one city, goes down the road 25 miles over and gets a job as a policeman and brings his bad record, bad conduct, and bad habits with him. It would create a national accreditation system. It would ban no-knock warrants and chokeholds. It would end this doctrine of qualified immunity and its companion, the Monell Doctrine, which prevents victims of police brutality from being able to bring lawsuits against an individual police officer or the department for whom they work when their constitutional rights are violated. This doctrine is like placing a naval blockade around federal courts to prevent police brutality victims from getting justice. Qualified immunity is a complex doctrine in its application, but simple in how it works. It simply says, no, you can't sue a police officer except in rare and specific circumstances, even if your loved one's been killed, even if you've gotten your jaw broken or been beat and have lacerations on you. Qualified immunity must be reformed. The bill also would change or create a new standard or change the standards around how police officers are prosecuted in federal court. Derek Chauvin was prosecuted in Minnesota state courts. This is federal courts. To allow a more rational approach for prosecutors to pursue bad police officers, brutal police officers that commit serious bodily injury or murder. The George Floyd bill would change that. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has passed the United States House of Representatives twice, stuck in the Senate because of Republican intransigence among many, a reluctance to go along amongst some, but we're still working, but generally a consensus of support amongst Democrats. But you know how this Senate works. With the filibuster, it takes 50 votes to proceed to debate and therefore to a vote. Antiquated, I know. Complicated, yes. Unnecessary, yes. Anti-democratic, yes. But it's what we have until we can muster even either the ability to put 10 votes together, 10 Republican votes to supplement the 50 Democratic votes to get to 60 to meet the filibuster test, or the courage amongst all 50 Democrats to do away with the filibuster. This is what we face with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Now, I want you to support it. I want you to understand it. But in addition to that, a federal law is not going to solve all of the challenges of policing, not make our community safe in and of itself. But it's important for Congress, important for the president to go on record in favor of police accountability, and that's what the George Floyd bill does. But we're also under an attack that is vicious and diabolical. That is the attack on voting, the attack on democracy, the attack on the very essence of what makes us the constitutional democracy, something fought for, yearned for, and something people used in record numbers in 2020 when 180 million people, 159 million people voted. 81 million for Joe Biden. And the second place guy, you know who he is. He was far behind in the popular vote. Record turnout because we had vote by mail, early voting. COVID forced a liberalization and a relaxation of rigid standards. And there was not any corruption or integrity issues. But now we see the big fiction, the Pinocchio lie. Yes. Oh, fraud. Lack of integrity. January 6th. The election was stolen. You see a plethora, a basket of lies being used to try to convince intelligent people that the vote should be suppressed, with these suppression bills being introduced in 40 plus states all across the nation. Why? Somebody lost an election. They don't like it. So now they say, let's put a new set of rules in. So maybe next time we can cheat the victory. We're in favor of democracy, universal voting for all. We're in favor of not making voting burdensome. We always had verification. It was called I sign my name. I sign my name. And it's worked generally well in many, many states. And now you want to change it to make it harder for people to be able to vote. National Urban League says no. National Urban League says we're going to fight for democracy. We're going to fight for unfettered access to the ballot box. We're going to fight for it. We're going to fight for it. So we got two big issues: policing, democracy, policing plus democracy and voting. That you need to be engaged with Mark Kelly, Kristen Sinema, and other congressional representatives to let them know what the Phoenix Urban League wants to say. George Floyd now. End voter suppression now. Pass S1 and HR 4. Let's do it now. Let's do it now. So I'm pleased to be able to just bring you up to date on these issues. We're active through Phone to Action. You can follow us online at nul.org and get all of our communications to keep up with these on a daily basis. You can follow us on Twitter at Nat Urban League, at Mark Morial, for the very same reason, to be part of this conversation and to be part of this discussion. We need you in the discussion. Phoenix Urban Leaguers, Phoenix residents, visitors, and friends. Again, I'm Mark Morial, and giving my very best to the leadership of the Phoenix Urban League. Once again, George Dean, Jerry McPherson. We will see you soon. That's the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Say yes. It's making sure that we have a voting situation, a voting system in this nation that's free and open to all, unfettered. So Mark Morial here, National Urban League, www.nul.org. Follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, at Mark Morial. And we look forward to catching up with you all soon. Thank you, Phoenix Urban League.
So those of you who are regulars to the broadcast, you know, at least one time throughout the broadcast, I'll talk on mute, and there it goes. I got it out the way. I'm glad I got it out the way early. But I wanted to thank Mark Morial, President and CEO of the National Urban League, once again for joining us today to tell us about what the National Urban League is doing, and not only the Greater Phoenix Urban League, but the Urban League affiliates around the country fighting for equality and justice for those in most need of it. Now, without any further ado, we'll move on with the broadcast and bring you the panelists that you have tuned in to listen to, more of the panelists that you tuned in to listen to. So as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, today or this month marks the 1-year anniversary from our inaugural Meet the Leaders broadcast. And that topic was police reform and social justice. And we thought it was opportune to revisit that topic, revisit that discussion, and kind of take a look back at how we progressed over the past year. But this time we're going to do things a little bit different. Now, full disclosure, we've invited Chief Jerry Williams of the City of Phoenix Police Department. Unfortunately, she had a scheduling conflict and was unable to commit to today's broadcast. She did participate in the inaugural broadcast and has expressed her displeasure with being unable to attend, but we do look forward to connecting with her in the very near future. In addition to that, U.S. Congressman Greg Stanton, he initially was able to commit, but unfortunately had to cancel at the last minute. And he too was a member of the panel about a year ago when we first brought this discussion to the forefront. And again, as I mentioned, unfortunately, he was able to cancel, and he too was looking forward to participating and will be connecting with the Greater Phoenix Urban League in the coming future. Nonetheless, we are excited about the panelists we brought together here today. And this actually affords us an opportunity to take a different perspective to the discussion. Previously, as I mentioned, we spoke to the police chief, U.S. congressman, those yielding a lot of power and a lot of influence on this topic. But we wanted to talk to those individuals who also emit some power, but at a more grassroots, a more direct level. Those folks that have their boots on the ground, the ear to the streets, that are working around the clock to make things happen. And again, members of our community and leaders in their own right. So with that said, I would like to introduce Jamal Williams, public defender and activist. Jamal, welcome to the broadcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the description. Different kinds of power we have access to, but power nonetheless, power in organizing, power in grassroots movements. So I'm glad to have that be acknowledged. I'm also glad to follow up Chief Williams and other elected officials this year, because I do think we bring a different perspective to this conversation. Like you said, my name is Jamar Williams. I was born and raised in Arizona. I'm from the west side of Phoenix, the west side of my city. I've been a witness to police abuse all my life. And I think those experiences have shaped the profession I chose, have shaped the activism that I do, and how I spend my time helping our people. These experiences have shaped the profession. We live in one of the most egregious examples of an unchecked police state in the nation. We are a top 5 incarcerator. We have one of the most violent police forces in the Phoenix Police Department, and we have no system of appropriate accountability for those police. And it's led me to believe many times that the American cop is irredeemable. And I don't say that lightly. I know what a statement that is, but if you look at the history in our city, if you look at the money we spend on our carceral system, if you remember in 2018, we had our Phoenix Police Department kill and try to kill the most people in the nation, a national leader. These are facts and statistics that are undeniable. And there are certainly the greatest arguments against abolishing the system that has created that violence. And I don't take saying that lightly either, but I think it's time. Asking the police department to change itself and asking the system to change itself. We've been doing that for a long time, and it's time to really change our tactics, in my opinion. I'm currently a public defender because I believe that the last line of defense against police abuse of power is a dedicated indigent counsel. So that's what I do. I'm also an activist, and I teach at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, trial skills. So my professional perspectives all revolve around defending ourselves and our communities against the most egregious examples of state violence, whether that be police killing us on the streets, whether that be prosecutors sending us to prison and jail where we die in those institutions, or whether that be our public dollars being wasted on $1 billion prison system. Those are all worthy fights for us to take up, and fights that I believe in our jurisdiction in Arizona and in Phoenix that have gotten way out of control.
Thank you, Jamal. Thank you for joining us on the broadcast today, but more importantly, thank you for your service to the community, particularly as a public defender, one of the unsung heroes in society, the folks that just quite frankly cannot afford other legal counsel, and you stepping up and providing them not only the defense that they need, but the quality defense that they so desperately need. So thank you for all of that, and look forward to diving into the conversation further. Next, I would like to introduce Warren Stewart Jr., pastor with Proactive Justice. Warren, welcome to the broadcast. Warren, you're also on mute. You're not alone.
Man, I did it for you, brother. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here and just to be counted in all the leadership that provides commentary. I am a pastor, influencer, and activist. My church is actually 12 Church, and I'm an activist with Proactive Justice. But I have grown up in this city and been an advocate of Jesus and justice. My dad helped get the King holiday a paid state holiday here in Arizona, so I grew up in that fight. And then my great uncle Timothy Mitchell, Dr. Timothy Mitchell, was friends with Dr. King in New York and Flushing, Queens. And so I have this great heritage of fighting for justice through the lens of the Bible, and that God is on the side of the oppressor, and that righteousness and justice are the foundations of his throne. And so that is why we fight and give a voice to the voiceless. And, when it comes to the work that we've done, I've been out there in the streets and the protests for many years, and performed funerals for the brothers that have been shot by the hands of police here in Phoenix, Arizona. And I don't take that lightly, because we also, in the midst of all of this that is going on with qualified immunity and police reform and police brutality and defunding the police, abolishing the police, there's so many ways we can go. But from a spiritual perspective, we continue to offer, just like the Black church has historically offered, insight, spiritual insight, but also leadership where other civic and governmental leaders may fail. The church is there to always hold the weight of justice in the world. And so that's why I represent the way I do, because I believe Jesus if he was here on the earth right now, he would be fighting with us. And so I'm also the co-chair of the Black Engagement Committee for the Maricopa Democratic Party with Carl Gentles. And we are endeavoring to change the narrative, Black votes, and also get more PCs recruited. And so we also, I have said this many times, that we want to move from protest to power. There has to be, and power meaning there has to be a transition from us just being in the street, saying no justice and no peace, but taking powerful seats to where there is more justice and more peace. And so for Jamar to say that and be a public defender, I just want to acknowledge you and just, give you props, man, for being a public defender and representing people who cannot represent themselves, especially who can't even afford that. And so our prison system, our police system is is lopsided. And so that's why you will continue to see the rise of people like myself and Jamar. And yes, we do need to hold Chief Williams accountable and Congressman Stanton. Just because they are elected officials or city employees, that does not mean they are exempt. And so we need a metrics and a checks and balances to see the progress that we are making, because what we are seeing is history repeating itself over and over. Our parents were in the streets protesting for civil rights. We're still protesting for civil rights and human rights and LGBTQ rights. We're still fighting for we fought for voting rights, and now we're fighting against voter suppression. So this is the fight that we will continue to be in. And so when it comes to police reform, and like Jamar said, in 2018, we were the deadliest police force. And as we move into the questions, I'll get more into that, and just want to see what the questions are, how they're fielded. But we have a lot of work to do. And if you're watching this, get involved. Don't just let the former or the current leaders that are fighting for police reform and activists, and don't just let us do all the work. Many of us do this for free. We put our lives on the line for people we will never know. And the examples of qualified immunity are very apparent, from Rodney King to Alton Sterling to Breonna Taylor. They're very apparent that police are protected when they kill Black and brown lives. And that's why we continue to yell Black Lives Matter, and we fight for justice. So thank you so much for having me on today.
Warren, again, thank you for joining the broadcast today, and thank you for the work that you are also doing on the front lines. And you brought up a good point, and it's a great way to start the prepared questions on today's program. So just a few moments ago, you mentioned speaking to the audience, speaking to the citizens of Phoenix, to not let the leaders do all of the work, that they too need to get active and get involved. So we'll start with Jamal with this question, then we'll come to Warren. But how impactful do you think those protests have been on achieving social justice over the past 12 months?
I love that question, because there is sometimes there's a criticism that us being out in the streets or those protests didn't produce enough. But I think that is that's an inaccurate assessment of the political activism that we saw during the uprising. We haven't seen that in a long time in Arizona. The last time I can remember seeing that, well, two examples, was the Red for Ed movement locally, and then the march against Sheriff Joe Arpaio and the policies the violence that he was perpetuating in our communities. Those protests, that uprising, I think demonstrated to everyone watching that we weren't going to take it anymore. When a lot of people tried to make changes in our city, tried to make changes in our state, they didn't really take us seriously. A lot of times elected leaders, people in power, didn't take us seriously. But I think those protests, people started to say to themselves, people in power, people with proximity to power, started saying to themselves that this is serious, and this is a serious issue, and people are fed up. After the uprising, those people just everyone out on the streets, they just didn't disappear. They didn't vanish. That was a lot of people's awakening. A lot of youth from those uprisings started organizations, joined organizations, started advocacy, policy advocacy, started talking to their friends, started talking to their families about what was going on, about why it was important for them to be in the streets. And that's one of the big areas where we need change, is the public narrative. We have a public narrative that police can do no wrong. We have a public narrative that police provide a public good. Police deal in violence. Even the good that they claim they provide, it's violence. It's arresting someone, taking that person away from their families, putting them in a jail or prison in the name of doing something good, when really that's violence. And I think the uprising is a good mechanism for us to begin these conversations and talk about why people are out there, why it was important, and why so many people were out there. I helped organize some of the initial defense for the protesters who were arrested when Governor Ducey instituted the curfew. And looking at those young faces in jail, knowing that what they did was right, and seeing the state, seeing the deputies in jail, seeing police treat them how they were treating them while knowing what they were doing was right, that's the greatest tool you could have gave us. Those young people are taking those experiences with them and saying to themselves, I know what I was doing was right, and yet the state responded in this way and either try to take my life from me or try to interrupt my life, my career, my family in irrevocable ways. Those people, I don't think will ever forgive the police for that. And now those places of power are facing consequences and repercussions for that. They're facing lawsuits. They're facing public scrutiny for that. So we got a lot of tangible things out of those protests and the policy developments, which I'll talk about whenever we get there. But we also got a lot of intangible impact on the public narrative of the system here locally that I think shouldn't be overlooked, and I think is a very powerful tool for not only organizing, but for sustaining the movement here locally.
Thank you so much, Jamal, for that response. Jamal, excuse me. Warren, would you like to take a stab at that question? How impactful do you think the protests have been in achieving social justice?
Well, we brought the energy and the power and the voice to the issues that were being ignored, and that's, I mean, when people want to say all lives matter as a rebuttal, which is a white fragility answer to Black Lives Matter, we're saying that because we have been ignored for so long, and so there are voices that rise up in the wilderness that cry out for other people. And without us as leaders crying out, we wouldn't know what the issues really are. We wouldn't be able to confront the systemic racism that is in the police force. And so, yes, we have been impactful to a point. And even at the August 9th arrest, I was supposed to be there, so I would have been arrested, but I was out of town that day. So they targeted protesters and activists and had lists of people that they wanted to ruin their lives. This is the wickedness and the demonic nature of the why we fight against this demonic nature, because they are trying to ruin people's lives for speaking up for what's right. That's why it's called civil rights, human rights. And yes, we were impactful because now more leaders are being raised up. Now more people want to run for office. People are studying policy. People want to make an impactful change. You can go out and start a march, and anybody can do their own following and have gatherings and things like that. But impact comes when you raise up leaders and change agents that infiltrate the system. And I don't care who it is that infiltrates the system, just as long as they're forwarding in justice and fighting for Black and brown lives. So yes, has some leaders that are in power changed their perspective because of what happened to George Floyd? Absolutely. It was the second wake-up call to hear again, I can't breathe, from another Black man who died in the hands of the police. And so we have to continue the pressure, because they have not stopped putting the pressure on us being Black and brown people. So we're going to apply the pressure right back. And let me quote Tupac. Tupac said that he gave this example of people that were hungry, and they knocked on the door and they asked, could you give us food? And then they didn't answer the door, and then we banged a little bit on the door, and they didn't hear our cry for for food, and then we kicked the door and they still didn't. And then he said, we coming through the door blasting. That's what we're doing, because you did not listen. Now, I'm not saying I'm an advocate for violence in quoting what Tupac said, but what I'm saying is we will keep busting down these doors of injustice until we are heard and change is made for Black and brown lives, period.
Thank you so much, Juan, for that powerful answer. And anytime you can reference Tupac, you know, I was gonna say it in a joking tone, but the reality is Tupac is one of the more influential and outspoken rappers of our generation, and you know, quite frankly, he should be quoted. He should be evoked in the conversation for you know, for having such a powerful and proactive voice. So, indeed. We'll go back to Jamal for the next question. And so, as I mentioned a couple of times on this broadcast, about a year ago, we did this broadcast, Police Reform, and now today we're doing Police Reform Revisited, and we're talking to our advocates and activists in the community. But in your opinion, how did the city of Phoenix and the surrounding cities respond to the cries of the public over the past year? And again, we'll start with Jamal.
True to form, true to form. They showed us who they are, and I think that was also one of the biggest organizing tools that we could have asked them to do. You know, for you know, my comrades at BLM Phoenix Metro, we had a protest over there. The next day, something happened with the train, the rail station over there, and they had the feds down here and the local police agency asking for camera, video evidence, and any information about the BLM protest that was over there. They're trying to blame us for the derailing of a train, right? You had the Phoenix police officers literally running around the city, trying to hunt us and shoot us with pepper balls and bean bags, literally creating war zones in our city. And, you know, there's moments during the uprising where they're claiming in the public eye that they're meeting with some of us and that they're trying to cross a bridge and trying to understand what's going on. If people remember, the mayor in Phoenix didn't say one word about George Floyd when it happened. The chief of police didn't say one word about George Floyd when it happened. It was only after the uprisings, after the protests, where they started talking about it, because it was a political issue, because it was a public issue that they knew they couldn't ignore anymore. Even after the uprising, you know, settled down a bit, these city agencies are still trying to attack and assist in prosecuting people out there exercising their First Amendment rights, trying to manufacture evidence, drum up evidence, trying to lie about people to justify ruining their lives, essentially, and manufacturing criminal charges. Policy-wise, I think we did get a little bit of traction. We have some cities open to ideas on how we can make changes, specifically Tempe, but also in Phoenix a little bit. But that system is still reluctant. The city systems and the bureaucracy is in love with the status quo. In love with the status quo. And what we need to do is break that status quo up and create new futures for ourselves. But the city is going to fight us every step of the way. And every win we get is going to be a concession in their eyes, and a concession in our eyes, because the city's never going to give us what we actually want. They're only going to make incremental steps because they have this disgusting grip on the status quo that protects people in power, it protects people of privilege, and it doesn't create equity, which is what we're seeking. So none of these cities responded in a way that made us sleep well at night. None of these cities responded in a way that gave us the hope we were looking for, but we did learn who they truly were. If at any point they were going to have an opportunity to change their behavior, if at any point they were going to have an opportunity to respect Black and brown lives, if at any point they were going to have an opportunity to look at themselves in the mirror and say, hey, there's some problems here, we need to address it, it was a year ago. It was after the uprisings. It was after the murder of George Floyd. And they didn't. They still refused to do it. And now we know, and I think a lot of us are learning who may be newer to this work, that you cannot trust these systems because they're involved in self-preservation at our lives' expense. And I think seeing our cities respond that way was a very helpful thing to see, because I think for a lot of us, it reaffirmed the work that we're doing in communities, and it reaffirmed the need for our advocacy and the need for the organizing that we have in front of us.
Thank you so much, Jamal. That's an excellent point. The reality is the time to make a statement, the time to take action was in the moment, not months or weeks later, where it's it can come off as a little bit more manufactured versus just doing what's right in the time it needs to be done. Warren, did you want to respond to that question?
I think Jamar answered that very well. Thank you.
Awesome. So we'll move on to the next question as soon as it loads up on my computer. So after a long drawn out battle, the Phoenix City Council recently established the Office of Accountability and Transparency to review questionable incidents involving law enforcement officers in an effort to hold them accountable. They are even currently recruiting to fill the position of director, which will oversee this department. What impact do you expect this will have on holding police officers accountable when they break the law? And we'll start with Warren.
I am not always hopeful when the city does something like this, and then you look at the job description and people that are maybe don't have the education or the experience in that field could not apply for that job. And so you already kill activists and people who have the heart that have been doing the work in that experience. They need someone like an activist in that position, but yet the education and experience of the job description already just siphons out other candidates. And so they know what they're doing by the job description that they wrote. So they're writing people out who should be in a position like that. And then, when you're beholding to being a city employee, sometimes you have to play by their rules. And so I will just wait and see how effective and how impactful filling this position may be. A lot of people all of a sudden, after George Floyd and the protests, wanted to be diversity, equity, and inclusion, and about change. And really, we have yet to see an impactful thing that shakes up the city and says, oh, this is it. Like the election of the attorney in Philadelphia, that shook up the judicial system. And so we need something like that. And the sad thing about them filling that position is we've been fighting for that for a number of years. And so, I'm not always satisfied by bones that they throw to us. And so until the structure and the system and the hidden systemic racism in our cities is shaken down and we have some shock and awe of true leadership, like Jamar said, our own mayor did not respond to it right away because she does not care about Black people. So, and other politicians didn't respond because they do not care about Black people. So if they do fill that position, I hope it is a Black or brown person, and someone who is credible within all the organizations that fight for justice and liberation. Because if not, we will then protest that decision as well. And so I don't like the bait and switch that the city's done, and I've seen it long enough. I've been in it, like I said, historically with my dad. I've seen them put their token people up there, but yet they puppet them in the background. So when true change does take place in the city of Phoenix Police Department, I will say that it was a good decision. Until then, I'm trying to be hopeful.
Got it. Thank you so much, Warren, for that response. And Jamal, I would love for you to respond to this as well, because I have to reference back when I was the president of our Urban League Young Professionals, you donated your time and led a workshop on civilian oversight, helping our members, helping the community understand what civilian oversight was. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, we even spoke about other cities that had the ideal model of what that would look like. So if you can, kind of tell us what you think, how effective the Office of Accountability and Transparency will be, and maybe even offer some input on what's missing and what needs to be included.
Yeah, I'm really glad. I'm really glad Pastor Stewart said that. Essentially, we have to look at it with a healthy dose of skepticism. And this is something that we've been trying to do, that people have been trying to do since the 90s. In even getting the Office of Accountability and Transparency, it's not a 2021 solution to policing. It's an idea from the 80s. That's a 90s solution to policing. But our city was so far behind other cities that we had to do something to make progression, to advance the cause of accountability and transparency, I think, and that's how we got the oath office. I think one of the important things that it could do is it could give non-police the opportunity to review police conduct. I think that's one of the biggest advantages of the Office of Accountability and Transparency, because right now it's all police. The system of review and accountability is maintained within the City of Phoenix Police Department. The decisions on discipline and consequences for police misconduct is made by the City of Phoenix Police Department. The investigations that are conducted into police misconduct are made by the City of Phoenix Police Department. And obviously there's a problem with that. So the Office of Accountability and Transparency is a sincere attempt to change that. And I thank everyone who worked on that and all of the people in power who supported it. There are other models in other cities. Specifically, Nevada has Denver, I believe, has a good, Denver, Colorado has a good system where they essentially have an ombudsman of the of policing over there, and they're able to review, investigate, and discipline, I believe. In Phoenix, we really do need a model that spans across abilities for a system of accountability and transparency. When the OAT was originally proposed, there were different options, and one of the options was to just review what the police were doing. In a lot of our opinions, that was the least effective model because there's no teeth to a model like that. We wanted something where people had the ability to review, investigate, and issue disciplinary proceedings or open up the books to the public, right? To actually have some sort of measure where police officers couldn't hide their misconduct in the dark, which is really what they're doing when the police do all of their own investigations and discipline. The oath doesn't get us all the way there. Mainly because of what was said already, because the city charter is set up to kind of prevent true accountability and transparency. The bureaucracy of the city, having a city manager who has so much power in a city like the City of Phoenix, a manager model, that's set up to prevent a lot of community access to the decisions that are being made to hold people accountable who work for the city. Those are real problems that OAT is potentially not going to be able to get around. And that is disappointing. but it is a start, and it is what people want. People wanted to have something other than the City of Phoenix Police Department to respond to their claims of officer misconduct, and hopefully OAP provides that. But it's a very big hope, and in a lot of ways, I'm doubtful in a lot of ways, but I'm also hopeful.
All right. Thank you, Jamal. So I'm actually going to stick with you, Jamal, for the next question. I know that, and I believe it was Colorado that has taken action to limit qualified immunity. And you mentioned Denver earlier, so kind of just staying in line with that. For those in the audience who are, let me back up a bit. I think it's necessary that we take some time to educate the community on what qualified immunity is. Personally, I think it's to be so influential and impactful. It doesn't get nearly enough attention it should be a household word at this point, particularly given the last 14 months. But if you can take a moment, educate our audience on what qualified immunity is and why it's so important.
Yeah, qualified immunity probably is, one of the biggest takeaways in the discussion about police reform that I think could be impactful if we did something about it. And for our viewers who don't know, qualified immunity is the legal theory that when police officers are acting within their powers, within their duty, within the in a lot of ways the job description that has been bestowed upon them, anything they do in furtherance of those aims is immune from criminal action and immune from, in a lot of ways, civil liability. And so what you essentially have is this legal principle that shields officers who can just claim they were doing their job from being held accountable either criminally or civilly. And some of the examples where the courts have applied this legal principle have gotten, really out of hand. You have people who are claiming qualified immunity for sexually assaulting people, for murdering people, people who are handcuffed, for substantially contributing to the death of prisoners, people in custody, and they're claiming qualified immunity as part of their job as police officers that are causing these absurd results, and really demonstrate how the system doesn't value our lives. It really demonstrates the underpinnings of why we're even out here saying Black Lives Matter. Federally, they're trying to do something about that. We heard a little bit about that earlier, trying to change or eliminate qualified immunity so that officers can be held accountable for their actions when they cause drastic injuries in these ways. And locally, we have a lot of rules and regulations that are local mirrors to qualified immunity that prohibit certain claims from being made against police officers, that prohibit certain claims from being made against the systems that subject us to violence. And I think even outside of what we're doing federally to address qualified immunity, we can even address some of those local claims that bar us from holding police accountable. And that's work that we can all do here locally. We can get together and draft those bills and talk to our elected representatives to pass legislation even locally that addresses some of those issues so that we can have a greater breadth of even state claims when police officers do wrong, putting the federal claims aside, which is where qualified immunity is applied.
Thank you so much, Jamal. And again, qualified immunity, as powerful as it is, it doesn't get nearly enough attention and I guess a loud enough voice and platform for everyone to know what it is. And quite frankly, I learned about qualified immunity about a year ago, thanks to the workshop that I mentioned earlier. And personally, well, actually, just before that, and that kind of what sparked us to host that program. I was just blown away the fact that a law enforcement officer can commit such egregious acts and not be held personally liable. Because all the time, we hear about these lawsuits, but I don't think people give enough thought that it's the taxpayer that's actually footing the bill. It's not, you can say it's coming out the city budget, you can say it's coming out the police department, but ultimately it's taxpayer dollars that is paying the price of that. And, until officers are personally held liable for that, who knows if it would ever begin to subside. But we got a few more moments for a couple of more questions. Those in the audience, if you do have a question, please drop them in the chat now. We have a few more prepared questions, and then we have some time for a couple of audience questions. I know, Jamal, you have a hard stop that you need to get to in time for your next meeting, so I will be mindful and respectful of that. Get to this next question, and it was.
I just wanted to say this as well for qualified immunity. I learned about it last year too. And I learned about it from a spouse of a former police officer who was, she had been working 20 years. And her husband told me, another pastor, and he said, if you're going to fight, this is what we need to fight. And I was thankful to receive that information, because sometimes as activists and protesters, we don't, even as pastors, we don't know. I mean, Jamar is, a lawyer. So, but regular people do not know the special protections that police get when they kill us. And if it's not specified, that's why they keep getting off. And so, and people should read it. I just want to give a resource to some people watching. Just Institute for Justice. That's a frequently asked question on ending qualified immunity and how does it work. And it started in 1982. So I would just challenge everybody to read up on it and educate yourself. So we even know the real beast we're up against. It's not just the police union, but from a Supreme Court level, they are protected when we are unprotected.
Warren, thank you. And that actually is a perfect segue to our next question, which I believe, and I'm sure you may or may not agree, is the other most powerful and influential item protecting bad police officers from being held accountable, and that is the police unions. So police unions across the country seemingly yield limitless power to protect police officers, making them nearly unfireable in many jurisdictions. What needs to happen to pierce this protection and make it easier to hold bad police officers accountable? And Jamar, Warren, either one want to take a stab at that? Jamar, you with us?
I actually missed the question. My connection is a little messy. I'm sorry about that. So go ahead, Warren, if you want.
Got it.
So, okay. Well, if you can repeat the question since he's back on, that's fine.
Yeah, so I was asking about what I deem to be the second most important tool to protect bad police officers from being held accountable, and that is the police unions. So this question simply put, what needs to happen to pierce this protection, make it easier to hold bad police officers accountable? And Warren, let's start with.
Yeah, I'm glad.
No, go ahead, Jamar.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that. I think the single, probably, I'm glad it's a top priority for you. I've identified it as a top priority. I might even identify it or categorize it as the biggest impediment to police reform here locally. We treat police unions, a lot of times I think police unions benefit from this idea that they are similar to other unions, but I really think that we should exclude police unions from the conversation about workers' rights, because police unions have very unique power as police officers that no other employee has, no other union has. There is no other union you can name that has the ability as part of their job to take someone's life, but they behave as if they're just like any other union. They negotiate their contracts as if they're just like any other union. And I think that treating them the same as people in power treating them the same is doing us a great disservice. And even having a public narrative that situates them in the same way is a disservice to where we need to go with policing in our localities and in this nation. Our local police department has a memorandum of understanding with the city. In that memorandum of understanding, we couldn't have even created an OAT because they negotiated for themselves that the Professional Standards Bureau, which exists within the police department, was the only agency that could investigate police misconduct. The reason they're negotiating that in their contract with the city is because they know they don't want anyone else holding them accountable. They specifically negotiate in their contract with the city. One of the most egregious examples, they negotiate a time period for them to get sober after committing an incident of misconduct before being questioned about that incident of misconduct. Now, we should all ask ourselves, why would police negotiate in their contract with the city a period to get sober before being questioned about an incident of misconduct? And the negotiations that happen in the city of Phoenix are behind closed doors. They're not open to the public. So these union representatives and other representation are negotiating with the city these egregious parts of their contract to protect them when they kill us and violate our bodies through other ways of violence, so that they can keep doing that without accountability. Once we open those negotiations to the public, then I think we'll continue to see real change, because OAT wouldn't have even been possible if we didn't change some of the mechanisms contained within the union negotiated contract with the city of Phoenix. And we need to continue putting pressure on that process, and we need to continue shining a light on some of the provisions that they've negotiated for themselves in that contract.
And it is a bit of irony, as connected as the police unions are to, or the relation to police unions and the Office of Accountability and Transparency, that these negotiations are happening without transparency. So definitely, particularly considering these are public dollars, that there's no reason why we shouldn't have full visibility, or at least someone in the room who can speak on behalf of the citizen, the individuals that are supposed to be protected by these law enforcement officers. We got time for one more prepared question. Unless, Warren, did you want to respond to that before we get to this final question?
The only thing I would add to that is, the accountability, that the greatest way to get some more momentum in our movement is to affect their dollars. So if their pensions were affected, or the way that they can continue living after they've taken a life is effective, that will be more accountability within the union. But, plea is on a local level, it does not care about our lives. So if our lives don't matter, then their money shouldn't matter. And so we should use that as a tactic. And I've heard that in conversations many times from many different activists, and I just want to see what that strategy looks like walked out.
Thank you, Warren. So the final prepared question, and I hope we got time for at least one audience question that I did see come through. But this, I guess, a bit of good news is the city of Phoenix recently allocated a portion of its next year's budget to better address mental health incidents. Licensed professionals will be dispatched to better handle these delicate issues. What impact do you think this will have to reduce the number of excessive force incidents involving police? Warren, and then Jamar.
Say the first part of the question, because I'm trying to read what you put up there, but I missed the first part.
Certainly. So the city of Phoenix allocated a portion of next year's budget to dispatch licensed health professionals, mental health professionals, to be dispatched in incidents that required such professional expertise.
Yes.
I was wondering what do you think that's going to have excessive?
Well, I'm a piece together. I guess my internet is glitching too, but yes, that has been an argument that I have said in activists, in protests, and many people around or other cities. I'm saying many people, but other cities have implemented those things. So we can have social workers and therapists respond to mental health challenges. We don't need someone with a badge and a gun and no college education to do something that's outside of their scope. And so that's why the need for community policing is a better solution than calling the police to respond to those things. So I just want to cut that short and get Jamar, so Jamar can finish.
Yeah, just briefly. In theory, this is great. Great idea. Congratulations to everyone who advocated for it. It would be wonderful to see. Giving the city a mechanism to reduce violence is a culture change for the city. And the city is not used to having a culture change of that nature. So while I'm glad that the idea is percolating in community and percolating in the city, there's going to be a lot of work to perfect that before we see any change, because I've seen how the fire department responds to those situations and their interactions with police and the way that they sit by and watch police do certain things in those interactions. And it's certainly not what we want, and certainly not what we envision when we are trying to avoid perpetuating violence on Black and brown bodies.
Thank you, Jamar. Again, I'm in full agreement. This is a great step towards helping mitigate potential incidents that can lead to harm or even death of our citizens. But obviously, thankfully, we have folks like yourself and Warren on the ground paying attention. That's going to continually speak up and speak out to make sure that we are getting the treatment that we deserve. We got time for one audience question, and then we'll yield the floor to each of you to give some closing thoughts. And Osnismus, forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Joe Biden announced today he is going to fund police forces to hire more officers and pay for overtime to allow more patrols of officers. What does this mean to you? How is this going to be handled by activists and folks fighting to defund police? We'll start with Jamar.
That is one of the greatest disappointments that I could envision when it reminds me of the feeling after the election. A lot of people said that Arizona, it's a great thing that Arizona had finally turned blue and we were going to see a lot of progress. This is an example of why that's not necessarily true for us and what we need to see on the ground, and for our local rules and policy that we're trying to create for ourselves, and the futures we're trying to create for ourselves in a city like Phoenix that Joe Biden has no idea about. For him to say that's what we need, it's not accurate. Those giving the police more money is historically the way that the federal government has responded, the way that even reformists have responded to convince us that it's going to all of a sudden magically change something. It's not going to change something. To me, that's a loss. That news is a loss. That plan is a loss. The only way we're going to have real change is by taking that money back. In the city of Phoenix, it's over $800 million. The biggest thing we spend money on is police. The thing we spend the least money on is transportation, public transportation. That's sick. We have a housing crisis in the city of Phoenix. We have food deserts in the city of Phoenix. We have an education crisis that the city of Phoenix could supplement or do something about. And yet we're throwing over $800 million at police and then getting supplemental millions of dollars from the federal government to throw money at this issue. It's ridiculous. And we shouldn't fall for that con anymore.
I agree with Jamar. It is disgusting and disappointing that a president who we thought may have forwarded some of our issues, we still get the same thing, which is why I say campaigning, politicizing, and words do not impress me. As a Black man in America, we have been fighting this fight since my father was a teenager. And if my children, my sons, were to and daughter, but my son's right now old enough, if they were to have children right now, my grandchildren would be having this same conversation. So why would we put more money into the police department when they have been the most lethal against Black lives? Why are we not putting more money in education programs, in music and arts programs, and building our community's infrastructure that is impoverished? And Jamar stated a lot of things that are going on locally. And here's the last thing I will say: as long as white male patriarch leadership is in place, we won't really see impactful change. And I stand on what I said. Until we have powerful, educated people of color, mainly Black women leading, with Black men and brown and women and men, and the LGBTQ. Until that is seen, they're going to keep giving money to the institutions that protect themselves and that they protect themselves. So they never protected us. So going back to police, the police were never designed historically to protect Black and brown people. And so from that, like Jamar said, we need a cultural change, not just in Phoenix, Arizona. We need a cultural change in America. And until we see that through the right leadership, they'll keep giving the money to where they want to give it to, and show us that Black lives don't even matter economically. You're funding the very thing we are protesting against. That's a slap in the face to every civil rights movement that was started in the inception, to every Latin movement that is started, to every equal rights movement. That is a slap in the face to all the work that we have done. And that's why we have to continue this work, because that whole generation that Joe Biden comes from has to die off in order for us to see real change.
Thank you so much, Warren, for those empowered words. Again, just like the panelists that we have, hearing the news that we are going to continue to give more money to the police department is disappointing. Well, particularly coming from a national level, where you have the most influence, most opportunity to affect change. To think that giving more money is the solution. At some point, we got to work smarter, not harder. And giving money, we learn that doesn't work. That does not provide the solution that our community needs. And again, it's just deeply disappointing. And considering how much effort has been put in over the 12 months, and many people on the ground, from a political election standpoint, to get more of the same is just deeply disappointing. We will move to closing thoughts. Jamar, I'll let you go first. I know you will have somewhere to be at 7 o'clock. We appreciate your patience and your time. So if you will, I'll yield to you for some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the conversation, that question, and the idea that, have us here this year to talk about what reform looks and what we're doing on the ground. I hope that we take away from these conversations an open-mindedness to the futures we're trying to create. A lot of times we get bogged down in these fights about, how crazy it is to say that we don't need police, or how dumb of a slogan defund the police is. But those criticisms exist in a world that only had policing. We have never seen the world we're trying to create. So we are trying to foster and create new ideas. And in that endeavor, we need to rethink what crime means. We need to rethink what harm means. We need to rethink what it means when someone is having a bad day or when someone is having the worst day of their lives, to just put them in a cage in response to that moment of crisis. And we need to shock the consciousness of society to get the ball rolling on those conversations and to get the ball rolling on building the structure of that society. So I hope that these conversations instill the urgency for us to have those conversations and the necessity to think about our futures in those ways, so that we can bring those thoughts into practice and bring those thoughts into policy, and get the work done.
Jamal, thank you so much for your time, energy, efforts, and your expertise on the subject matter. Please continue the good fight. Members of the community very much and desperately need your work and your efforts. So we support you and we appreciate everything that you're doing. Warren, would you like to share some final thoughts?
Yeah, as a pastor, I'm going to share one of the first things that I said when I started being an activist after Remain Brisbane was killed. He was friends with a few of my members from my former church, Remnant, and I did want to get involved, and I saw my dad and what he had to go through in the fight, how it was continuous, and it had never stopped since I was a child. But destiny just calls you to step up to the plate. And so I was asked to come up and speak. And what I said that night, and did not even know that I would be doing a funeral for Remain, but what I said that night was, we have to stop asking Pharaoh to free us, because Pharaoh won't. Pharaoh is the systemic racism. Pharaoh is the injustice. We have to stop asking them to free us. And like Jamar said, we have to create a whole new culture, a whole new America, or a whole new subculture that finds a way to thrive and live out our lives in the midst of so much oppression. We are tired. I don't want my grandchildren in this fight. So it's now or never that we support the right leaders and the right organizations and the right elected officials and the right candidates who are going to create this new culture and this new way of thriving living for people of color. And so until the new leadership regime takes place, we will still get a mixture or a diluted version of justice. But I do believe and have hope that God is raising up the right leaders in the right time, whether they have faith or no faith. I still believe God is in control of everyone who comes into power, and we have to bow at his name. But at this time, if there is somebody even watching right now, it's time for you to get involved. We need more people forwarding this movement and fighting for justice. We need more voices, Black, white, brown, Native, Indigenous. We need everybody. And so this is not just a fight for Black lives or brown people. This is a fight for humanity and for us to empathize with each other. And until that happens, we will continue to see some of the same things. But I have hope because you put on forums like this. So thank you to you and Greater Phoenix Urban League, Jerry, and President Mark, and George Dean and Jamar and everybody who is watching tonight. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
I can't thank our guests enough for the time, energy, efforts to have this conversation, to talk about some of the things that, quite frankly, don't get talked about enough, but more important, because again, we have this conversation often enough, or maybe not often enough, but it's beyond. It needs to go beyond conversation and actually take action, get active, boots on the ground, making phone calls to the elected representatives, and being informed, most important, because if you're not informed, no one can expect you to take any action if not the right action. So thank you all for the time, energy, and efforts that you put forth. One other tidbit of information that I'd like to share before we pass it to George Dean to give our closing thoughts is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2021 that President and CEO Mark Morrell mentioned earlier. It has passed the House. It has yet to be voted upon by the Senate. Arizona has two Democratic senators that were recently installed within the last about 18 months to 2 years. I would encourage all of you to pick up the phone and call your elected representative and ask them what is happening, why aren't they voting on it, where they plan on voting. And again, these are your elected officials. This is one piece of national legislation that can impact our lives at a local level. So again, I would encourage you all to reach out to your elected officials, Mark Kelly, Kristen Sinema. They are senators representing Arizona and have influence in making sure this bill gets passed. They need to hear from you. With that being said, I would like to pass the floor to President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Urban League, George Dean, for closing thoughts. Take it away, George. George, I believe you're muted.
Sorry about that. All right. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you did as I asked and listened closely, and because some very important information went out tonight. I give a special thanks to both Pastor Stewart Jr. and to Jamal for their very candid conversation that they had in terms of passing along information to the public and so forth. It was very worthwhile. In fact, I learned some things myself from what they had to say about what's going on as far as police reform and where we're going as a society and so forth. So do as I asked you to do earlier. If you have not been vaccinated, get vaccinated as soon as possible. It is very important. And like I said, the life you save could very well be your own. With that, I would say we'll see you next week. The Greater Phoenix Urban League will be next week with a forum. And be safe, stay safe, keep up the good fight, and keep going as we're going now. Good night.